Afternoon, welcome back to the channel. Fun one today. We're going through 20 pieces of photography terminology that you might not know if you're a beginner. Let's jump in. Okay, so if you enjoy the video, if you find it funny, find it helpful, find it interesting, whatever like that, do me a favor to put a thumbs up down below. It will massively help me out. It helped me out with your algorithm, get this video out to other budding photographers, the lot. And if you're new here or you find yourself keep coming back, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. Basically, we're going to rapid fire through these 20 photography terms that you may or may not know. They're all pretty simple and all pretty easy, but they're terms you just don't know unless you know them, you know? Some of them you might already know if we're going to start off with those ones, but the rest of them are slightly more obscure, and as I say, they're ones that you kind of pick up along the years of photography, and until you actually, you don't want to ask. Everyone uses them, and you don't want to ask what it means because then you look stupid. So you just keep going until one day you either figure it out or you just give in, you ask, or you Google it, or whatever. These just random terms that they just come up, and you're just like, what the hell does that mean? And if you're like me, you've probably been in a conversation and someone's used the term, and you're just kind of like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And inside, you're just like, what the hell is going on? So we're going to go through 20 photography terms right now. Okay, so jumping in, starting with 4 easy ones that you probably already know, which are going to quickly rapid fire through these. This is exposure, which is how much light is coming into your camera, how exposed your image is. Aperture is the opening in your lens which lets light in and out towards your sensor. Shutter speed, how quickly or slowly your camera takes a photo and open and closes the shutter. And ISO is how sensitive your camera is to light. So they're the first 4 that you probably already know. If you don't know them, or if you're brand new photography and you're learning it now, I've actually got a whole video on the exposure triangle and explaining how these settings work together and everything like that. So I'll link that up above and in the description below, so you can go check that out if you're interested. So depth of field. Depth of field is how much of your image is in focus. The lower your aperture, the shallower your depth of field, which means a smaller area in your image is going to be in focus. Using this shot here as an example of this is a squirrel. You can see in the middle of this image there is a sliver which is completely in focus. Everything behind it and everything in front of it is out of focus. That is your depth of field. The wider your depth of field, the more of that image is in focus. Focal length. Focal length is how zoomed your lens is. This is an example of a 50mm focal length because I'm shooting at 50mm. If I was shooting at 180mm, it'd be a hell of a lot more zoomed in on me. If I was shooting at 17mm, it'd be all the way zoomed out. They are different focal lengths and they equate to different looks because each focal length will give the image a different look due to compression and everything like that. Aspect ratio. This is the ratio of the width and height of your frame. So my camera, for example, defaults to shooting video in 16:9 aspect ratio, but it's a different aspect ratio for shooting images. I don't even know what that is. I think it's 5:4, maybe. Wide open. Wide open is when photographers refer to your aperture. Wide open means I'm shooting at like 1.8. I'm shooting at a really low aperture number, which means the lens is wider open, is letting more light in, and that then gives you a shallower depth of field, and it gives you more bokeh, everything like that. F-stop. F-stop is your aperture. So I'm shooting at f1.8, f2.8, f5, f whatever. I'm shooting at an f-stop is your aperture number. Fast glass. This is one that when I was starting out photography for ages, I was like, what the hell is fast glass? Fast glass just means that a lens can open up to a lower aperture number. So 1.4 is considered a very fast lens, a very fast piece of glass. And that leads us on to the next one. When photographers refer to glass, they're talking about lenses because they're made of glass. Glass just means lens. I don't know why we do it, but we do it. So fast glass means a lens which can shoot at a wider aperture. Bokeh. I just mentioned this a minute ago. Bokeh is the visual quality of the out of focus areas in an image. So when lights, for example, in the background of your images are out of focus because you're using a shallower depth of field, they'll often appear as complete circles, or they'll be slightly more oval depending on the quality of the lens you're using. But they are what's known as bokeh balls in the background, and this is a good example of an image with loads of bokeh balls because all the lights in this are out of focus, and that's bokeh. And generally speaking, the rounder the bokeh, the better it looks. But it's different lenses give off different bokeh. Vintage lenses especially can give off different bokeh effects, and they look really cool. So I've got a 55mm vintage lens which shoots quite swirly bokeh. It's the visual quality of the out of focus areas in your image. Prime or fixed. These are referring to lenses. So like my 85mm is a prime lens because it doesn't zoom. It's just a lens that doesn't zoom. And a zoom lens is one where you can change your focal length, so you can go from 28 to 70mm like I can on this lens, whereas my 85mm is stuck at 85mm. That is a prime or fixed lens. Crop sensor. Crop sensor is a type of sensor. It's generally found in the cheaper cameras. Full frame is a different type of sensor, and medium format is another type of sensor. But if you're referring to a crop sensor, it means it's got a sensor which has got a 3.5 crop on it compared to a full frame sensor. Entry-level DSLRs, intermediate DSLRs, everything like that. The cheaper range cameras all have crop sensors, and so you get a slightly different look to full frame sensors. Full frame is a sensor where you're getting the full image. Crop sensor is basically a sensor where it's cropping part of it. You're not getting the full range you can from a sensor because the sensor's smaller. Full frame is referring to a full frame sensor, so you're getting full use of the sensor. It's not cropped at all. Post. I'm going to fix that in post. I can do that in post. What the hell is post? Post is post-processing. So it's editing, it's in Lightroom, it's in Photoshop. It's whatever application you're using to edit your photos after you've already taken the image. That is, you're doing it in post-processing. RAW. This is not with an R on the end. It's not like a dinosaur or the emo kids of 2012. This is RAW as in file type. Generally speaking, you can either shoot in JPEG or you can shoot in RAW. It's just a different file type. It contains a hell of a lot more data, so the files are a lot bigger, but because it contains more data, it's a hell of a lot easier to edit your images afterwards. You get more data retained, you can save more in your image because you've got more data in your highlights, in your shadows, in your colors. You can do so much more with RAW images than you can with JPEG images. So that's what RAW is. It's a file type that your camera probably, I'll be surprised, it's 2021, if your camera can't shoot in RAW, assuming it's a dedicated camera. I mean, even iPhones can shoot in RAW nowadays. Like, yeah. We've got two left. Noise. Noise, or can also be referred to as grain, is what occurs in your image when you shoot at a higher ISO. As I said in my exposure triangle video, I kind of use raindrops on a windscreen to explain it. If it's spitting, if there's more noise, it means it's like raining heavily and it's just covering your windscreen. It's a lot more noticeable at higher ISOs, which is why you try and keep your ISO nice and low to avoid getting too much noise in your image. And finally, the one that honestly confused me for so long, I joined a lot of Facebook groups and everyone was using this one and I had absolutely no idea what it meant until one day it just twigged and I was like, oh, TOG or photog. It's a shortened way of saying photographer. Photographer. TOG. I just ages. I was like, what the hell is a TOG? Why are you calling me a TOG? What is a TOG? It's a photographer. It's just such a lazy way of saying photographer, but it's a thing they do. And yeah, that confused me for a while. I happily put my hands up and admit that confused me for a while, but that's what it means. It means photographer. TOG or photog, depending on the group you're in apparently. So that's it. That's 20 photography terminology terms that you now know. You can now be a boss when you're talking about photography. You know exactly what you're saying. You understand what you're talking about as well. And you can stop being involved in conversations just nodding along as if you know what's going on. You actually know what's going on now. So that's it for me. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up down below. It would massively help me out. Subscribe if you aren't already. All the other stuff that YouTubers tell you to do. And I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to take the shot. Peace.